I just love learning. And I think that like I spent so much time masking while I was supposed to be learning as a kid that now I just want to learn and grow and try new things all the time because I was afraid that people were going to find out that I was, and I'm using air quotes, dumb. But now I'm like, oh, it doesn't matter if I fail because I'm going to learn from that and then I'll do something else. So like my learning disability and my attention deficit has been like, I think my greatest gift because it has created this space where it's like, I did this, I masked, and now I don't want to mask anymore because I want to be who I am.
Something I love is when I'm speaking with a professional who does have a background in punk and hardcore. And of course, this podcast isn't only about that. It's just super fun for me because there's something about people from punk and hardcore where it's like they could have a lot of great experience or they could have a lot of great education or both, but they always find a way to draw from punk and hardcore and how that has kind of played as always a consistent foundation or landscape of how they get things done. And it's something I always say a lot is no matter what, if you want to hire someone who's going to figure it out, always hire a punk because nobody's better than punks at figuring it out. So with that, today's conversation is with someone who has a really, really cool story. Actually got to see Negative Approach, which we'll touch base on in a little bit. And also is just like a real interesting and charismatic person. So with that, before we get to the interview, please subscribe to the podcast, rate, review, all of that good stuff. My name's Aram and this is One Step Beyond. Sarah, welcome to the show.
Thanks. So good to be with you.
You too. I'm super stoked.
I know I am too. I'm all like, let's go.
So for the uninitiated, for the people who don't know, who are you and what do you do?
Okay, so I am Sarah Kuretzky Rossington, and I am the hardcore therapist. That is my name. That is my brand, and I'm a therapist. So I mostly work with people in mental health capacity, obviously, but I do a lot with substance use disorder and eating disorders are kind of my area of expertise. Also, I have a lot of relationship clients, so I do that. I go to festivals and I do a lot of education and support with people who maybe want to have a more sober experience at a festival. That's kind of who I am.
Okay.
And what I do.
There's a ton to unpack there. Let's just start with the basic premise. You talked about like the different kinds of areas where you specialize. Could you just hit on each one and kind of just unpack those for us?
Yeah, for sure. So I actually struggled with disordered eating throughout my life. I've been an athlete and I always wanted to try to be like, I'm a taller, bigger person. I always wanted to try to like shrink myself. So I actually went into personal training and health coaching to get a better understanding of that. So I've actually used that information. I'm working with clients who have eating disorders and disordered eating, but I'm like certified in intuitive eating, and I work with people with different eating disorders. So like right now I have clients who have ARFID, which is a feeding disorder. Usually it's linked to autism spectrum disorder. I work with people who binge eating disorder, and also anything in that area of anorexia. And I work on programming and planning with them to understand not only the mental capacity, but also the nutritional information that they need to know to help them with that. So that would be one area I work on. Yeah. And then substance use disorder, I actually thought that was the area that I was going to go into when I did my education. So most of my classes were geared towards substance use disorder. And I'm a proud member of Al-Anon. So I've experienced people in my life who have been addicts and alcoholics. And so I've done a bunch of training in that. So I do harm reduction is my area that I really look at. And harm reduction is like, if people still want to use drugs and alcohol, what kind of plans and what we can create for them if they don't want to get sober. So creating different kind of situations for that. So that's my substance use knowledge. Like it is not my expertise, but it's definitely the area that I have like a strong passion towards. And clients seem to be really excited to work with me because of I'm very like open book and talk about personal experience as well.
Excellent. And then you also mentioned some focus on relationships.
Yeah. So I like kind of stumbled into that. That was not an area I thought I'd be interested in, but all of a sudden I was doing a lot of work at the where I work. It's called Tree of Life in Detroit, and we were doing a lot of work with families and divorce, and they were asking if I would work with people because I have a background in education. So I started working more, and I did Gottman training, which is for relationships. So I started working with people in that capacity. But also, like, I think that a lot of people really lack a relationship with themselves. So I usually have people look within a little bit more to understand who they are and like what parts of them that are holding them back for the relationships that they're in.
Yeah. So around disordered eating, I'd love just your thoughts on if you could just tell us a little bit more about it, because I think
Yeah.
people in general kind of understand it, but I think it's always great to get a bit more into it. But also just what, if any, impact you think that social media and kind of this focus on presenting ourselves to the world might be playing in that.
Yeah, for sure. So, disordered eating is different than an eating disorder, and I really try to clarify that with my clients because a lot of a lot of people will just be like, "Oh, it's my ED." Like people will say like it as like kind of like a badge of honor, and so I educate them on the difference. So, disordered eating ends up being like that people who yo-yo diet, who overexercise, underfeed themselves keep on jumping on fads, and social media is like a huge part of that. So like you might see like I'm going to use keto, and like if people are on keto, cool, and it works for you, awesome. But like if someone sees keto and they're like, oh, I need to lose weight, keto's the only way I can do it, and they'll jump on that for a while, and then they might lose weight and then they gain weight back, and then they're like, okay, so now I'm going to become vegan, let's do that, and they continue to change and do that. So that's more of the disordered eating. I always ask people when I feel like they have disordered eating over an eating disorder, why they feel like they need control. So we work a lot on that idea of control. So that's that piece. With eating disorders, it's really kind of scary what we see in social media. And like if I have teens that have eating disorders, one of the first things we do like a digital diet because I love that word diet, and we get rid of all of the people that they follow that contribute to their eating disorder. So it might be an influencer who is like doesn't eat, or what they eat in a day. I don't know if you've ever seen anything like that, but it's like what I eat in a day, and it's like an almond and like a glass of water, and that's what they eat in a day, and that's what people kind of gravitate towards. Or people who over exercise, right? And that orthorexia is another part of eating disorders that I think people don't have a lot of information on, where people are exercising for an insane amount of time to maintain a body size, and they will only eat foods that they deem good, right? So we're looking at things like, I'll just tell you how I suffered. I wouldn't eat anything white, right? So like I wouldn't eat white rice, I wouldn't eat white potatoes, I wouldn't eat white bread because those are bad. And so like demonizing food, and you'll see a lot of that on social media, and it's perpetuated all the time. And then the idea of like looking like celebrities, or these influencers who are having cosmetic procedures done to change their body to look a specific way, when like my clients specifically don't have the means for something like that, and they think by eating and doing all these things that they're saying that they should be able to shrink their body into that kind of size.
It feels like, and certainly this is just like opinion based here,
Yeah,
it feels like the impact of social media is so unavoidable. So like I actually personally don't have, I have like social media, like there is like
right.
one that has my name on it, but it's really just like we just put things out about the podcast or about the company
Yeah,
on it. And I used to be quite active on social media, and I just found it, not only did it eat up too much of my time, but it just was a constant source of anxiety for me,
for sure.
especially as the world has kind of become increasingly complex and there's a lot of like really intense things happening in the world. And I
Yeah.
just had to seek for something quite a bit more simple in my life and kind of pull back from being too interacting with too many people. But
Yeah.
so if I'm saying that, like I'm going to be like 50 in like a few weeks. If I'm saying that at 50, I can't imagine what a 23-year-old is and how that's playing with their mental health because they're on blast constantly. It's what they grew up with.
For sure. Do you know the book Anxious Generation?
Mm-mm.
Have you heard of that book? Oh, anyone listening or viewing, like check out that book. Anxious Generation talks about how much more anxious kids are since 2013 because of the rise of social media. And I truly believe it. Like every time I'm working with kids, we talk about their social media. If the kids are younger than 16 and I have their parents' involvement, I talk to them about, screen time and use of screen and understanding what happens to their brains when they're constantly getting this information fed to them and how it can affect them in a negative way.
From your perspective, and again, like just really looking for opinion here. So social
Yeah.
media is not going away. If anything, it's going to ramp up and kind of morph and do all these things. What is the way that someone could possibly manage having good, strong mental health while also knowing we're going to be immersed in this going forward?
Yeah. I mean, I have a 16, almost 17-year-old daughter, and obviously she's grown up in this, right? And she sees this all the time. We talk about like using social media and how to use it properly. And when I'm working with families, like I do believe kids need limit on social media. I do think that you should put those blockers on there. I think as adults we need it. And if we're unable to do that ourselves, to actually put those timers on our phones so that we know that we're not getting sucked in for too long. I mean, for me, like I have Instagram on my phone, but I don't have Facebook or any other kind of social media that I'm getting sucked into, because I know for me, I mean, I unfollowed so many people that were any kind of influencers with diet and exercise because, again, when I was personal training, I wanted to see what they were doing, but I can't see that anymore because I know how it affects me. So yeah, limiting who you're interacting with, limiting your time, and making sure that you're using social media outlets in the way that you feel confident about it. If it's creating any kind of anxiety, I think like taking a month off of social media, like people do this all the time. They'll be like, I'm taking a month off of social media. I think it's a great thing. Even it's just kind of, maybe it's not off topic, but it's just something that I do with social media when I work with kids. I sometimes do kids retreats. It's a communication retreat. And for that entire weekend, they are not allowed to have their phone so that they are present. And a lot of kids will tell me they don't even want their phone back once it's over. And to be able to replicate that in everyday life, I think is a really helpful thing. So creating those kind of systems, I think, is really helpful. Putting your phone in a different room when you want to communicate with people, having your kids, not have screens at restaurants, like the iPad kids, like that just needs to stop because kids are not learning how to communicate well. And then they're so focused on what they're seeing rather than internally like who they are and what they really like and need.
Going to your path, you have a really cool story. So you've had multiple careers,
I have
and
had multiple careers.
I'd love just to hear about your journey, about how you've landed where you are today, including the rebrand and why that happened.
Yeah, for sure. So I have a learning disability. I have dyslexia, and I did not think I was going to be able to go to college. Like I graduated high school with a 1.7. I was like I was on a third grade reading level my senior year of high school. Like I just was not going to do it. I somehow talked my way into Wayne State University, which is in Detroit. It was literally the only school I wanted to go to because it was in the city and, hardcore, right? Like it was still pretty vibrant when I started. What happened was I thought I wanted to be a finance and economics major, but I ended up taking photography. I thought it would like be a blow off class, but I realized it gave me the opportunity to say things that I couldn't say in writing. And I was like, yes. So I got a BFA in photography, and then I moved on to the School of the Art Institute of Chicago for graduate school. And I became a teacher. So I was a K-12 art teacher in the city of Chicago. I taught in Cabrini Green, which at the time in the 90s was like the toughest projects in the United States. Um, I had like bullet holes in my window, like people would walk me in so that I'd be safe. And it was freaking hard. It was really hard being an art teacher in the city, but all I wanted to do was give people a voice that they felt like they didn't have. And so I continued for many years teaching in some sort of capacity. So then I was married, and my husband at the time and my child, I only had one at the time, my child and I, we moved back to Michigan. I was in Chicago for about 9 years, moved back to Michigan. I ended up doing another graduate program in art education, thinking I was going to get my PhD. So I thought I could create sort of programs based on this idea of giving people voices and like people knowing their stories better than anyone else. And it's not for me to say this should be your story. And so I ended up teaching at the university level and still teaching. Like I taught at a alternative high school for a while, and I was really into this whole thing. But public school teaching is really hard. Like it's really difficult. And I did it from 96 until 2022 in some capacity. I kept on going back to teaching. And I started a PhD program to become a principal and realized that it was not how I wanted to do things. And then I was like really into nutrition, and I was like became a personal trainer and a holistic health coach. I'm doing that in teaching. I was really trying to figure out my way. And I was never afraid to try things. And, and that was something that I was really into when I taught art. That was what I would tell kids all the time. Like, don't be afraid, like try it. If it doesn't work, it's cool. It's cool. We can figure it out. And I lived my life like that. And then I was teaching in a very lovely suburb in Michigan. And I was teaching photography, and the principal at the time was like, hey, we have this program that is dying that we really want to revive. It's called experiential education. I had no idea what it was. And she's like, I really think with your how you work and like your idea of doing service and your idea of like getting kids to think outside the box, like I think you'd be perfect for this. So I was like, okay. And I ended up just like totally changing my path, and I stopped teaching art, and I ended up being the head of experiential education, which is adventure-based counseling, essentially. So what I did was I taught kids it's called natural resources. So like, how do you use your own personal natural resources to do problem solving? So I actually it was an amazing school. I had a high and low ropes course at my school, and I would teach kids how to work as a team, as a group. I did like all the things that I feel like businesses do, where they're trying to like get like people to work together better. Like I facilitated all of those things. And then like I had some tragic stuff happen in my life, where I had someone that I was with who was a heroin addict, and he was my high school boyfriend, and then he died of a heroin overdose. There was a lot of other things in the middle of that, but I can talk about that more. But I just wanted to get to the work part. But it made me decide, like, I want to help kids like him. Like he did not, like, I mean, we went to high school together. He didn't have a person and an adult that they could confide in and really talk to and create this place where there was safety. And if he maybe had that, maybe he wouldn't have gone down the path that he went down. And so I decided to go back to school, and that's why I was like substance use disorder. But I really wanted to work and do that in schools. It just doesn't, like, schools don't really want that. Like at least the schools in Michigan didn't really want that. And so then I just decided to go in private practice a few years ago. And so at first I was Sarah Kuretzky Wellness, because I had owned that name for a really long time because I was still doing health coaching a little bit on the side, and I was still doing personal training on the side. So I'm like, okay, I'll be Sarah Kuretzky Wellness. And I branded myself in this very stereotypical therapist way. Like the images were like people holding hands, like relationship coaching, and just like so not who I am. And I had this website, and like nothing happened for me. Like I was getting no work. I wasn't happy with it. I would look at it and I'd be like, ugh, and I'd have to like get out of my own website. And then I decided last year, because I was, working, as a therapist, but I was like, actually, I'll tell you, Raghunath Ray Chapo, right, from Youth of Today, actually kept on being like, oh, it's Sarah Kuretzky, the hardcore therapist. Like, he kept saying that. And I was like, huh, I am. And then other people started calling me the hardcore therapist. I was like, huh. And so then I was like, I actually messaged Porcel because he's the hardcore yogi, right? So like I messaged him and I was like, would you be mad if I refer to myself or branded myself in this way? And he was like, I don't own the name hardcore, Sarah. Like, you're being ridiculous. It was kind of funny. Right. And so I rebranded myself. And then one of my art students from the high school I worked at went to School of the Visual Arts in New York. And she did branding and graphic design and stuff. And I did a Pinterest board for her, and I showed her like old, like hardcore, like posters and just like fonts and different kind of things. And I'm like, and like mixtapes were really important. And like, so I was like, Jeff Koons is this like guy who makes art, who actually has other people make art. So like, I felt like that of this, and I like told her exactly what I wanted to do, and she created this branding for me, which is exactly who I am. And since I become the hardcore therapist, I'm more authentically who I am, and people are more interested to hear who I am because I'm being me, and I'm not trying to be like I even dressed when I first started being a therapist. I dressed totally different. Like how I'm dressed right now, like I totally go to work in a baseball hat and just wear like band t-shirts and a pair of Adidas and go, right? Like that's who I am. And I connect so much better with people because I'm being authentic to who I am. And that was like the story. And I feel like that was so long. I'm sorry.
Listen, you don't know of long. Sometimes when I ask people that, I'm like that was perfect. That was great.
Thank you.
There's tons to unpack there.
Yeah.
Can I share a quick story with you before we go?
Oh, for sure. I love that.
So when I moved from being a therapist, so when I was working in the social services in Vancouver, BC, where I live, and just the general area in the Lower Mainland, I could just wear like a t-shirt and jeans, and I was used to that. When I started working in the consulting world and working in like leadership, I worked for this consulting agency that was like, I can't even put into words how corny this place was. And I was like relatively young. I had never worked outside of the social services before. It was like my first jobs were always social services. So when I worked there, my boss at the time was this total fucking cornball. I cannot even tell you how corny this dude is. He was like, oh, like, you can't let people see your tattoos. I met this guy just total by accident, and he like really like came after me to come work for the company because I was a therapist. And when they hired me, it was like flip the switch. It was like, don't tell anyone you're a therapist, never let anyone see your tattoos, never talk about being in a band or any of that stuff. Here's all of our intellectual property, memorize this and regurgitate it. And I was like, oh shit, I am not here because of anything of who I am or any of these things. All I am is a vehicle to sell your intellectual property to other people. And like, I'd left my career as a therapist, I'd made this big leap, and I was like, I didn't know what to do. So I was like, okay, I'll do this. And I'm like, I've never worn a suit before outside of like a funeral or a wedding before. I'm like walking around, like I'm just super uncomfortable. And I said to him, he kept harping about my tattoos. Like my sleeves weren't long enough, like the sleeves of my shirt, in his opinion. Right. And he tried to get me to get specially tailored shirts that the sleeves would be like ultra long.
Right, so it'll almost like cover your like hands. So it was like you're like a little kid in someone else's shirt. Yeah, awesome.
And I was like, I'm like young, and I just left my career, so I was like, I didn't know how crazy it was for someone to say that to you, and so I just said, listen, I'm going to make you a deal. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to get these shirts. Because I knew like somewhere inside me, this is like too far. And I was like, I'm not going to do that. But what I will do is let's give it 6 months. And if we receive one negative comment about me having tattoos, of people being able to see like that much of my tattoos, I will get like some crazy long shirt. Like, I don't, whatever you need, it's fine. But up until that point, if past 6 months, nobody says anything, we're never going to talk about this again. And he was like, okay, absolutely. And within that first 6 months, once I started getting a little bit more comfortable and kind of people could see a little bit more of the tattoos, and I kind of talked about being a therapist and coming from the punk scene, clients loved it. They were crazy about it. And people were like, oh, you played in a band? Tell me what that was like. Oh, you were a therapist? And they would open up in different ways. And it was suddenly, we went from like everything about you is wrong, only represent the company and the IP, to, oh, well, how can we use this to our advantage? And like, it was like a total switch. And of course,
Yeah.
it still wasn't like, they didn't view it as a good way. It was just like a way that they could use who I was as a way of like marketing their stuff
Right.
anyways. But it was such a lesson for me that like, as soon as you go into a situation and you start like basically like being ashamed of who you are and trying to hide these things and present this thing, you're completely limiting your ability to actually be of service to people. And I just wanted to
Right.
connect to your story there, because like as soon as I started being who I actually was in an appropriate way, like,
Right.
I'm not like leading with stories of like the Cro-Mags or something like that in my client meetings, but like I'm being smart about how I'm talking about stuff. But
Right.
as soon as you bring who you actually are into your work, that gives you an ability to actually be of service to people.
100%. I totally agree. And I realized I was doing that in teaching, but I felt like once I was going to a different career, I couldn't do that anymore. And I don't know why. No one told me not to, but I don't know. I was like, people won't take me seriously if I'm wearing a baseball hat. I don't know. Just so silly.
Well, but it's also so much like there. I understand where that's come from, because I kind of like maybe historically, like 30 years ago, maybe people wouldn't have cared, but
Right.
nobody will care in modern times.
Right.
Uh, so I want to go back into your story and hit on a couple points, because there's so many things I'd love to talk about.
Yeah.
First, let's go back to growing up with dyslexia.
Yeah.
So differently understood in modern times than it was when we were younger people. So
For sure.
how did your experience of that in like kind of early life inform your approach to working with people?
That's an interesting question because it was hard, right? Like no one knew that I had a learning disability. I mean, like teachers would just say like she's lazy, she talks too much, she's too social. I mean, I am too social, so maybe that's true. I don't know, but I think what it did was it helped me. Well, first of all, I felt like it was like the most hardcore thing in the world because like I've made it through school and I had a third grade reading level, like, and I still like people thought I was like super smart. They had no idea, right? So it was like that whole thing. But I think what it did was it taught me about resilience and to be able to advocate for myself. So I think as a therapist and when I work with kids, one of my goals always is like, how do you advocate for yourself? And you are more resilient than you think you are. And I think that is kind of informed how I talk about that with people. And I'm like, I also do something that is not a normal thing. I think in therapy is I self disclose a lot. I use myself as an example a lot. I don't want to necessarily use clients, so I use myself. And when I have kids who maybe are struggling with ADHD or are on the spectrum or have learning disabilities, when I tell them like, oh yeah, me too, and they're like, really? They get really excited about it, and we can have conversations. We're talking to parents about that and how to parent kids who struggle in that way. Because I think a lot of times what happens, what I have noticed at least, was a lot of parents will take things away that kids are really good at when they're struggling in school somehow, or they're not picking up what people are putting down. So for instance, like my son also has dyslexia and he has ADHD, and like something I tell people all the time is I would never took football away from him. He played football. He ended up playing college football. I didn't care if he got suspended because sometimes he wild out. I did not, I mean, I cared, but like, I did not care that he struggled in school. That was not something that was going to be taken away. And I think letting parents know that it's okay to allow kids to be who they are and who they're meant to be and to come into their own has been a really, I think, powerful piece. And I think that really informs a lot of what I do.
Going going to that though, like as you said, it was like very like poorly understood uh,
Yeah.
in our younger years, but you had this ability to advocate for yourself. Was that something that had been modeled for you by someone, or was it something that was just natural, or something that you learned over time?
I think some of it was natural. Like I actually, it's so funny because I always tell these stories about myself to people. Like when I was in kindergarten and I couldn't read, but the kindergarten teacher was like teaching other kids to read. I said to her, and I got in trouble. I said to her, like, "Hey, they already know how to read. Why aren't you working with us who don't know how to read?" Right? Like, so like even at 5 years old, for some reason I don't know why I was doing that kind of things, or like in the early 80s, like I really wanted to be a bat person for the Detroit Tigers. Like I really wanted to do that, but they only had bat boys then. And I wrote a letter to the Detroit Tigers that I wanted to be a bat boy. And like, I was probably 9 years old or something. And like they sent me stickers back. It was lovely and stuff. But like I know I started doing those things. And I think that it was just kind of innate. Like I always kind of like fought for myself. And so I think it was that. And yes, people did not know. Like, again, they found out my senior year of high school because I had an amazing teacher my end of my junior year of high school, Mr. Whitlock, who is like, I will like talk wonderfully about this man for the rest of my life, who I was in a marketing class and he gave me an exam and I failed the exam. And then he gave it to me orally and it was out of 50 points. I got 49 out of 50. And he's like, there's something wrong, and he helped advocate for me. And I actually heard someone giving a speech about dyslexia, and she was talking about like all these things that she used to do. Like she used to like count the people to see where she would have to read. Like I don't know if and when you were in school, when we were in school, like we'd all have to read the textbook together. So she would count where her number was, and she wouldn't listen to what anyone was saying and practice and practice. And I totally did that. Or my favorite thing was I would go to the bathroom right before it was my time to read in front of my class. So like I was savvy, right? Like I would figure out these things so people didn't know that I was struggling so much. And yeah, so then when I was at end of my junior year of high school, I actually called the Michigan Dyslexia Institute, which is this great place here in Michigan. And I called and I'm like, hey, I think I might have dyslexia. How much does testing cost? I did this myself, no, not my parents. My parents were actually angry at me that I did this. Sorry, mom and dad, if you listen. And they told me it was $300. I saved $300. My mom and I got in a fight the day that I was supposed to go get tested. And I started walking there with $300 in my pocket to go. Because I was like, I have to figure out what's up. And then she ended up going, and then so then they realized I had dyslexia. And so yeah, I think it was an innate thing. I think it was a little bit of a hardcore thing too.
So going to that idea of being able to advocate for yourself. So it's not just like kids who are trying to learn this. Like in my work in the corporate world, and I imagine in your work as a therapist,
Yeah.
a lot of adults still struggle with advocating for themselves or maintaining boundaries or kind of like holding their ground in a healthy way about appropriate things. So anything that you want to share that you feel comfortable sharing about like how people at any stage in their life could
Yeah.
ease into learning how to advocate for themselves or maintain boundaries?
So when I'm working with clients, I ask them what they think their boundaries are, because what my boundaries are aren't going to be the same as your boundaries. So for them to really be able to know themselves well enough to know what is acceptable and is unacceptable to them, and work from there. And that is the first place you advocate for yourself. Because sometimes I'll have clients who'll be like, well, what do you think my boundary should be? Dude, I don't have to live your life. You're good. Like you have to tell me what you want and I will help you get there. So that would be my first thing that I work with clients is like, what do you find acceptable and unacceptable? And then another thing that I really advocate when I'm working with clients is just because you've had patterns in your life where you've not held boundaries and where you've allowed people to take advantage of you, or you haven't advocated for yourself, it doesn't mean you can't change. And let's talk about how we can make those changes. And they don't need to be something huge. You can start with something small. Like, I'm going to use this as an example. Like if your teenage kid is like, Mom, can you go get me a glass of water? And they're just sitting playing video games, but you're carrying in groceries. You can say no, but you can help me with the groceries, and see how that feels before you start, doing like kind of a more high risk kind of things.
Do you mind if I share something I talk about in the corporate world?
I love it. Please share away.
Very often when people are talking to me about boundaries or advocating for themselves, there can be like a level of like, oh, I've never been good in this in my life, or I've been avoidant of it, or not like actually I have been good at it. But the thing that people often come back to is like power dynamics and fear of losing their jobs, consequences, and all those things. One of the things I talk about is a version of what you just said. Is it doesn't have to be like 0 to 60 instantly, or you don't have to
Right.
go to like level 10. It's the figuring out how to do that in your ecosystem, your professional ecosystem, by degrees
Yeah.
over time, and socialize people to it, but also give people enough time, with the idea that being, if you change, people's perception understanding of that change is probably going to lag by about 6 to 8 months behind the actual changes you've made before they like
Totally.
actually recognize it. And that advocating for yourself and developing boundaries shouldn't be a, I haven't done this and it's Wednesday, and now on Thursday I'm going to do it, and there's going to be this huge thing, because power dynamics are real, consequences are real. Like
Yeah.
sometimes people benefit, and quite often benefit, by people not advocating for themselves and not having boundaries. And if you do want to
Correct.
change that and remain in your job, you got to be strategic and pace it out over time, while also anticipating that it will take your audience a while to acclimate to that. And I'm not
Yeah.
saying that's a good or a bad thing, but that's the reality of working in social settings where there is power, consequences, and all those types of things. But I didn't want
For
to get your
sure.
thoughts on that.
No, it's like that's amazing and accurate. I think that that idea of 0 to 60 is huge. Like people think that that's what it looks like to advocate for themselves, is like they have to do some sort of big grand thing. And and you're right. Like it takes time. It's practice, because people don't know you in that way, right? They know you as someone who is like going to be the person that they could always go to, like, oh, I can't get this done, you'll get it done, I know you'll get it done. I struggle with that, to be honest with you. And like it takes time for them to learn that this is a boundary that they can't cross anymore. So yeah, I totally agree with what you're saying. I think that's great.
It's a wild thing though, because like, like I mean, I struggle with my own
For
boundaries
sure.
and advocating for myself, or because I own the company that I own Cadence, and then also I've been a boss for a number of years. I've also had people where they're like, they have to advocate for themselves with me, and then I have to be like, are they right and I'm wrong? Or is this like, it's like there's that kind of
Right.
weird thing where you're like, am I being like a dick? Or is this like,
Right.
like it's such a wild thing. And I think that having had the chance to be on either side, and also learn
Yes.
when I'm like, oh, I actually am being a jerk here. Like good on you. Like being on those things, it's like advocating for yourself and having boundaries and maintaining boundaries is such a complex thing for almost everybody. No,
Yes.
very few people don't struggle with this. The main idea though is like doing it by degrees, socializing, like really anticipating. It's not just about the boundaries and the self advocating that you want. It's also recognizing that you do have to. You have an audience that you have to cultivate that with if you're trying to create a change. Whether a boss, you're trying to learn how to like chill out, or if you're someone who's trying to create things, it is about recognizing you have to kind of bring an audience with you.
Totally. And I think, you brought up something that actually made me think of like this idea of trust, right? And like, oftentimes I'll ask people like, how much do you trust other people? And then how much do you trust yourself? And like I have them do a number. And sometimes people, notice that people have like poor boundary setting. They don't trust themselves and they trust other people. Like I trust that this person is going to do right by me, but might not really be the case. So kind of figuring that out too for yourself to not understand where they're at with them.
Yeah, that's something that like, when we talk about hardcore, that I think is like an interesting thing, because it's like got so much like structure about like community, and we look out for each other, and it's all these like ethics
Yeah.
and morals. And then sometimes you're like, is that true? Like, are we like maybe trusting that a little bit too much? Anyways, we'll
Right.
we'll we'll get to that. Another part of your story that I really find fascinating is your comfort of pivoting. Like you are like totally comfortable with pivoting and trying new things. Again, is that like a natural thing for you? Is it something you learned? Was it a model of behavior?
No, it was definitely not a model behavior. My father, I mean, maybe. My father owned his own company, him and my grandfather, and like it was a family business. It's still actually a family business. And everyone kind of worked in there and like everyone kind of did that thing, right? So I don't know. I think it's again an innate thing. Like I love, first of all, I get bored really easily. I know this is a little ADHD of me, right? Like I am also have ADHD. So I know that's part of it. But I also like I just love learning. And I think that like I spent so much time masking while I was supposed to be learning as a kid that now I just want to learn and grow and try new things all the time because I was afraid that people were going to find out that I was, and I'm using air quotes, dumb, right? Because I had to just try to keep it together. But now I'm like, oh, it doesn't matter if I fail because I'm going to learn from that and then I'll do something else. And so like my learning disability and my attention deficit has been like I think my greatest gift because it has created this space where it's like, I did this, I masked, and now I don't want to mask anymore because I want to be who I am. And yeah, so I think that's that. I also, being an art teacher is really hard because you lose jobs really easily. Like, they're gonna cut our jobs. That's what's gonna go. So I think that was part of it too, because like every year I'd be like, I might not have a job this year. What else could I do, kind of thing. And I mean, that's another piece of it. Yeah, I just like to. I don't know what that is exactly. I think it's me
Well, the reason
and
I'm asking
hardcore.
is, well, totally. Like that's like a hardcore thing too. But so the reason I'm asking is for a few reasons. One, it's just like throughout your career, you're like totally you have no problem pivoting, and also that focus of giving people a voice, like making sure people have a voice through art,
Yeah,
and also like in your later career where you'd mentioned like people having someone to talk to, like people having a way that they can express like their suffering or the challenges they're
yeah,
having. Um, that idea of creating options basically when I'll say again in my work in the corporate world, one of the biggest themes that I have is people feeling stuck, like really
yeah,
stuck. Like I'm in this career that I like, but I don't like the company I'm in, or I like the company I'm in, but I don't like what I do, or I feel like I'm stuck in this role, or I don't want to be in the corporate world. I want to go off and be a therapist, or I want to start my own business, or I want to be an artist. People feeling really stuck but
hmm,
too the idea of change and pivoting and trying something new seems daunting because also there's all the life implications like money,
yeah,
like how you're going to retire, like what's going to happen if you have
yeah.
kids, like what's going to happen there. So any thoughts about how people can get a little bit more comfortable with the idea of pivoting or taking risks or challenging or even just finding a voice?
Yeah. So that's so much. Okay, so one, golden handcuffs, right? Like you're talking about golden handcuffs, hardcore, right? So like being a teacher for as long as I was, I knew exactly how much I was going to get paid. I knew I was going to have summers off. I was going to have vacations, right? I worked in a district that they paid the teachers well at the end. Like it's hard and it's scary. And I think, I don't know, I have a spiritual practice and I think that that has influenced me trusting because like I know in my opinion, this is not everyone, I know I'm not by myself. So like I trust in the higher power that is going to help me. And I think that I think that's part of it. I also think money comes and goes, right? Like it just does. And I don't think, I talk to people who are, in therapy who are, have terminal illnesses. They are not saying like, man, I wish I worked more at that corporate job or whatever. Not to say that it's not good. They're talking about wanting to, spend time and have moments and live life. And I think being willing to look at that and live life is going to give you I think, I don't know, for me it gave me the push to do something different, to know that I'm always going to be okay. Like it's always going to work out. It always has. I mean, it's worked out. And I think it can work out for someone else who's afraid. I know people have done this, and I don't think there's anything wrong with this, is stay in your corporate job for a while and start your other career. So I hate saying side hustle. It's so corny. It's so dumb. Sorry. But like start it. Start your business. And that's actually what I did when I was teaching. I started working as a therapist part-time while I was teaching, and it kind of made a little bit more of that safety net. I knew that I had the ability to change people's lives in the way that I had maybe an education. I could continue to do that in a different capacity. And I think that like if we have our own like kind of mission, like our own personal mission or our own vision statement or anything like that, I think my vision has always been I want to give a voice to people who don't feel like they have a voice. And I kind of have just taken that with me with every kind of pivot that I've made.
I love what you're saying about build it up on the side. And one of the things I encourage people to think about is like your passion doesn't always have to be your gig, right? Like
Right.
you can start it up on the side and just enjoy doing it and have these like moments of like just totally being engaged in your passion while also still having like a really great paying job. Or maybe it's a crappy job, but a poor paying job, but it's keeping the lights on. Keeping a core of stability while either you build something up in the background that will eventually become your thing, or at least get your kind of like toes wet, see how it goes, see if you actually like it, or just keep it as a side thing entirely the whole time while also doing this thing. There's nothing wrong with that. One of the
No.
things I really try and encourage people to do is like this is like life is not like a TV show where everything has to be these like ultra definitive dramatic moves with
Right.
like it ends with a story arc. Um,
Yeah.
that life it really is like seasons that are going to continue. It doesn't end in half an hour or 2 hour window, and that you really do have to
Right.
treat it as something that you cultivate and try over time. The other thing I really encourage people to get comfortable with, and this is going to sound like real morbid, I encourage people to get very, very comfortable with the idea of death. But I don't mean in this like in like a terrible like death. It's like, well, no, just like recognize that the death is like a realistic thing, and whatever anyone's spiritual belief is about after the moment of death is up to them.
Yeah.
But that there is an unknown finite amount of time they're going to be on this planet, and we should be using that as a goal of like we shouldn't always be living in the future or engaging with the past. That like each moment should be measured as like, hey, this is a diminishing clock that I'm working with right now, and I should be trying my hardest to engage in life in a way that's like meaningful to me, that offers like happiness, offers like all of the things, while also recognizing that there's going to be moments of toil and challenge and difficulty, and that's in
Totally.
there as well.
Totally. And I'm sure you know that, so I'm just going to say it because maybe that people who listen to your podcast don't. Like anxiety is being too much in the future, and depression is hanging out too much in the past. And if you focus your life in that way, this is where you're going to have more anxiety or depression. And I think that makes it more difficult to move forward to have purpose in your life.
Yeah. My wife and I were just on vacation, and
I heard.
um, it was sick, but like the thing that always happens to me the first few days of vacation is I go through this insane like anxiety burst where I'm like, oh my God, the company's gonna go bankrupt. And like even if we're doing really great, I'm like, the company's I'm gonna have to lay everyone off. And that's like stage one. And then stage two is like, oh my God, like, like look at this, my path. I could have done this, I should have done that. And it's always like a couple days. And
Yeah.
it's the same thing. Whenever we go on vacation, I just like I feel it coming and I push it down because I don't want to like bother my wife with it. And she
Yeah.
knows something's going on. She just kind of waits for me to talk about it. And usually about day three, I'm like, bah! I say all this stuff.
It's
And
so
then
funny.
I get it taken care of, and then we go on. And then I'm like I'm on vacation. It's like happens almost every single time.
It's funny because my husband's a teacher, and he actually has a handyman business on the side, and he's a musician. And I'm always like, my favorite Don is vacation Don. Like, like because I'm the same way. I'm like, oh my God, like I'm not seeing clients. Like, not only am I spending money on vacation, but now I'm not making money. Like I do that for like a minute. But like vacation Don is like he's chill because he has his paycheck, right? Like, because he's a teacher and he's good and he's super calm and like very logical. And I get like all emotional, and he's like, it's okay, you'll be fine.
It's so
Yeah,
hilarious
it
how
is
we are.
funny.
Um, so I do want to talk about something again in your story that's sensitive, and you brought it up, and we'll go wherever you want to go,
Yeah,
including just moving on. You'd mentioned the loss of someone very close for you, and how
yeah.
that kind of like set you on a new path. What could you share with that?
I mean, I totally have no problem sharing that whole story. I actually was interviewed for a book recently about like the most tragic thing that happened in your life and how it impacted you, how it impacts you. And so this person who I dated in high school, so we dated on and off from like 16 to 23. We were both like hardcore kids, like into music. He got into heroin and he got into just partying. And like at first, I think he started like going in people's cabinets and like getting prescription drugs and stuff at parties and stuff. And we kept on breaking up and getting back together. And when I went to grad school when I was 23, he told me like I smoked heroin for the first time, and I was like, oh my god, please don't ever use a needle. He's like, I'm afraid. Like I already knew this. I'm afraid of needles. I'm like, okay. He ended up intravenously drug user. He went to rehab. We reconnected. I was married to someone else at the time, and it just like I knew I couldn't be around him because he was my drug of choice. I'll just put it that way. And it was very difficult. And so many years, I was married to my first husband for 14 and a half years. He would come in and out of my life, and if he was using, he wasn't using, he was using. And then I don't know if he found out I got divorced, but like 6 months after I got divorced, he called me or messaged me. I can't remember. He messaged me, and he was like, "I've been clean for over a year. I really want to see you." So we like immediately got back together, like it was like high school all over again. And he lied. He was not clean. He might have been clean like the first 3 months we were together. And he started doing like wild things in my house. And like, I didn't know. Like, I mean, maybe I didn't know, but I didn't know. Like, I told myself I didn't know. And he was stealing money from me because I was personal training more at this time. So I'd have a lot of cash in my house. And then I'd be like, oh, I must have counted that money wrong. Like, really silly things. He's like, I would be sleeping and he would steal my car at night and buy drugs. And I really didn't know any of this was going on. He ended up going to jail for a little bit. I ended up taking him back. It was like a hot mess. And then I got worried that like I could lose my kids because he's so wild. And I was being wild. Like my behavior changed. I had addict like behavior. And so I was lying for him. I was covering things up. I like paid thousands of dollars for him to live somewhere because he didn't have a job. Like I was doing all these really wild things. And we broke up because he actually I thought he was going to burn my house down because he nodded out and he smoked, which is crazy because I've been straight edge my whole life. Like I do not use drugs or alcohol. I don't even drink caffeine. And he nodded out and was smoking a cigarette over my recycle bin, and it was full of paper and it caught on fire. And like I was like, this, I have to let him go. And so we broke up, and then he started doing crazy things. Like he would go on my social media and pretend he was me, and he started sexting other people pretending it was me while I was teaching. And then he sent the sexting stuff to my principal and said that he was a concerned parent, and then daughter saw this. I had to get a PPO. It was very tumultuous. It was like crazy relation. It sounded like it was like out of a movie, right? It did not feel like real life. And I was a mess. Like I am not naturally a depressed person at all. If my kids were not in my house, I laid in bed, did not come out of bed, did not do dishes, did not clean my house. Like I got up to go to work. I was able to function enough to work and to take care of my kids, but that was it. And then he tried to get back together with me and things, and I just was like, this is not good. And he catfished me once and pretended he was someone else. It was wild, just all these wild things. And we were not talking, and his mom called me, and I was at a friend's house, and I didn't answer the phone, and I said, Dennis, that's his name, overdosed. And knowing before I even listened to the call, like there's no other reason why she was calling me. And I listened and he did. And it was the most like heartbreaking thing I've ever dealt with when it comes to death. Like I'm a pretty like logical person with death. Like it happens, people die, but because he had so much potential. Like, we've known each other we knew each other since we were kids. He was so smart, and he started a label with one of our friends, and it ended up, doing pretty well for a while in the late 90s and 2000s. Like he had all these things. He was a chef and he was great at that, but he just had such a difficult life that he wanted to die. I think it was purposeful. He sent me a email saying like, you're the only one who knows what I want after I leave my body. And I spent a long time in therapy myself and went to Al-Anon meetings almost every day for 2 years. And, about 6 months, 8 months afterwards, I was like, I have to help. I have to help people. I can't allow people to die in this way and not have, because for a long time I thought I could just love him enough to make him better, but that wasn't the case. So that's actually why I decided to go into therapy, which I actually think I always wanted to be a therapist, but I never really had the push. And I think that was really my push to go into it. And I am so sad that happened to him. And I'm so sad for his mother because both of her children died of heroin overdoses. But this tragic thing happened and changed my life. And at the time it was really negative, but now it's like the most positive thing that I think that could have happened for me to move forward. I think I took something terrible and make it really positive now. And I think that that's an important part of pivoting too.
Yeah. Thinking about the idea of the most tragic thing that's happened or most painful thing you happened, and then turning it into something that is meaningful or important for yourself or for other people. I mean, that's like a conversation that I think is like, it's out there. Like people talk about that. There's good examples of it. But in the moment, again, it's not like flipping a switch. Like it's something happens on a Wednesday and by like Thursday, you're like, no, it's this uplifting thing. It's a process. So
Yeah.
you talked about like going to therapy, but how long did it actually take you to take this thing? And I also like just hear about like what the process was. How long did it take you to take this terrible event and turn it into something that could give to others and including yourself?
So, I mean, I really want to say that I think I started doing the work before he died. Like a year before he died, I started doing work, maybe even a little bit more. And so he died in December, and by April, I was already enrolled in school. So, I mean, I was gutted. I was devastated. Like, I mean, I still get misty about talking about it. It's difficult. He was for the longest time the most important person in my life. And yeah, I mean, like I did a lot of work in therapy for, I would say 2.5 years of therapy, like every week, really trying to figure out my part, because I had a part in this, not in the part of him dying and using heroin, the part of it, I really I enabled him so much, and I put my kids at risk, and I had to really look at myself. Why did I do that? Why was that such an important thing for me to do? And so, yeah, really being able to look at yourself, I think, is how you figure out who you are and where you need to go, and how to make a difference in this world.
So like I went through a period in my life. I've always been like a very like I love doing stuff. Like
Yeah.
I like doing a band, doing a record label. I like going to school. Like I've always been ultra busy, and part of it was just like like a person who's like maybe not ready to deal with like whatever's going on inside of them, so they're constantly like involved in stuff. And also part of it's just like I love doing stuff. I love bringing people together. I love making things, and I had just had this life that was just like a massive adventure. ever since I was a kid, like just doing all this stuff, traveling, doing all these things. I hit a point in 2016 where a bunch of stuff all kind of like went off the rails, and like in a pretty crazy, like not pretty crazy. It's like the most intense period of my life is like 2016 to about 2020. It was about and I'd say it went even a little bit further than that. Probably about 6 years of just like living hell, and there was just like thing after thing after thing that happened, including like my dad getting sick, like all of this stuff, right? Pandemic in there as well, like all of this
Right.
shit. And it was like about a 6 year period, or I just was like, I don't know how I'm gonna get through this. It was so awful and so crazy, but also at that time, like the greatest things in my life that ever happened in my life ever happened.
Yeah.
I met my wife Monica, and she brought with her into our relationship these two wonderful girls. I had my first child who's 6. I started Cadence, but at that time I was like, who I was eradicated. My self-confidence went out the window, like all of it. I was decimated as a human being. The best things that have ever come, the best version of me is now 100%
Yeah.
as a result of that. I'm doing the best work I've ever done. I think I'm the best partner I could ever be, the best father I could ever be, the best friend I could ever be, the best business owner I could ever be. But doing that was not like this, again, this like wonderful story arc of like, the beautiful music came in the background and I was like, I shall turn this. It was like, I don't know how I'm going to get through today.
Yeah.
I feel like I feel like I just can literally not make it through this day. Anxiety through the roof, all of that stuff. But it was like, literally, as corny as it sounds, it was just about like, get out of bed, make your bed, open the windows, take a shower, put on a shirt, like do your Zoom call with your team, like make that meeting, put your anxiety aside, have that phone call with that client. It was one step, one step, one step. But also at the same time, I was seeing a therapist every week for like a few years.
Yeah.
Um, I did the things that I needed to do, like get off social media,
Yeah.
reduce my circle of friends, like really intently, and not say anything negative about it, anyone. It just like pull in my perspective a lot,
Yeah.
really look at myself in the mirror about the good things, the neutral things, the shithead things, and really like make peace with those things and make the changes. Took me a long time, but like throughout all of that, I was doing what I would say arguably are some of the things that I'm the most proud of in my entire life in that period,
Totally.
while also going through like the worst shit. And I don't
Totally.
know, like, well, I don't know if like everybody needs to go through this in their life, but I
No.
think I do think like
No.
I think it's really easy to say like romanticize the ideas like your worst situation leads to your biggest thing, your
Right.
greatest thing. But it actually was true for me, and it sounds like it was true for you as well.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I wouldn't have met my husband either if I didn't go through all this, right? So, and he absolutely makes me a better version of myself, and I'm more spiritually connected because of that relationship. I'm more spiritually connected because of all the things that I think I went through. And it was fucking hard and it sucked. And I really was angry for a long time. And it was actually around the same time as you. Like I was really angry in 2016, 2017. It was really hard. And I didn't understand why my life was so hard. Like I would say that all the time. Like, why does my life always have to be so hard? Why do other people seem like their life isn't so hard? And I think, I don't know. It was hard for a reason. So it's all good.
Totally, totally. All right, so let's get into well, actually, before we get into where we're today, we're kind of skirted around a little bit. We have a shared passion, a shared interest, shared community.
Yes.
Tell us about how you found punk and hardcore and the role it's played in your life.
So, like many middle school girls, I had a crush on a boy. His name was Chris Riley. He's still out there. Hi, Chris Riley. And he made me a mixtape from like the college radio station. I think I was 12, right? And he had older siblings, and like, I don't know, like it became my thing. Like I was so excited about this mixtape. And I remember like Bitch and Camaro was on there. And so silly. And like there's, dead Kennedys on there, and, Black Flag. And I was just like, oh my God, this is it. Like, everyone was like really into Michael Jackson, and Prince was starting to become a thing. And I was just like, I need something more. Like, I was in third grade, and like people were having like Sean Cassidy on their wall. I had the Stray Cats on my wall, right? Like, I was definitely going on a different vein. And yeah, so I was like 13, 14 years old. My parents, I have an older brother who's 3 years older than me. And like, these things would not happen now in 2024, but like in 1983 ish, my parents left us alone, like home, like they would go on vacation and we'd be home. So I started going to like shows and stuff when I was like 13, 14, and saw Negative Approach, saw Almighty Lumberjacks to Death, saw Disgust, I've seen, like, I've probably seen Agnostic Front and Sick of It All, like, I don't even know how many times. Like, a lot of great hardcore bands from New York came through Detroit, and that was kind of my thing. And I felt like I could be me there more than like, because I grew up in a pretty affluent neighborhood in Michigan, and I never felt like, even though my parents like had money, like I never felt like that was who I was. I just didn't fit that. And so yeah, I started hanging out in Detroit, like for sure 13, 14 years old, for sure, all the time, and had a fake ID and started going to clubs and doing the whole thing, and saw Youth of Today in 1988 at Blondie's. And, like I just have these memories of these shows, and it just became such a big part of who I was. And like, I wasn't there to hold anyone's coat, right? So like, that was like a big thing for women at the time, or girls at the time. A lot of girls were girlfriends, and then they come and go, but I just never did at that time. It's so different now. Like, I don't know if you've been to a hardcore show now, not like that at all. But yeah, so that's kind of where it all started, thanks to Chris O'Reilly.
If we go back to like your early story and living with dyslexia, like, and kind of having a little bit of that like outsider experience in the education system, do you think that played at
Yeah.
all into your entry
Oh
into
my
punk and
God, yeah,
hardcore?
for sure. Because like, again, I went to like probably one of the best schools in Michigan, right? Like middle school, high school, and you know kids just did, they were into their thing, and I was always a little bit on the outside. Like, in middle school, I got voted like least likely to succeed kind of thing, and I was like, that's fine. Like, I was like, cutting up my jeans and putting safety pins in them and dyeing them, and like trying to figure it all out. I bought Loose Nut, was the first album I ever bought by myself. And I was like, yes, I do think that I was an outsider who for a long time thought that I needed to fit in because that's what I was told to do, but it didn't work for me. So I did my own thing.
Yeah. I found
How
punk and
about you?
hardcore. Well, yeah, I found punk and hardcore through skateboarding, but I found skateboarding through being like a outsider. So I grew up in Calgary, Alberta. Both my parents were immigrants, and they came from a ethnically diverse marriage, or culturally diverse marriage. Like, my father is Armenian, my mom is Irish, which today I don't think anyone would like blink, like bat an eye at, but back then it was
Right.
like they're marrying
Big
outside of their
deal.
cultures. Right, it was a huge deal. They met in Africa, they traveled all over the world, and then they moved to Montreal where they had me. When I was 5, up until I was 5, I was always surrounded by family because my Armenian family was in Montreal. But then my dad got transferred to Alberta, and like suddenly I was this kid with this very exotic sounding name, like Aram Arslanian, but I'm surrounded by kids with like Jack and Sally. And it was like day one, people are like calling my family like all sorts of names. I'm like fighting in school, like literally from day one. And so I'd gone from this like totally surrounded by like comfort, love, all of that kind of stuff, like extended family, to suddenly we were like the immigrants in the neighborhood. Even though both my sister and I were, well, I was born in Canada, my sister was born outside of the country, and it was like a weird combination of like deeply trying to fit in, like trying to fit in as much as I can, and also like recognizing I was going to have to fight constantly. So getting like, I got kicked out of school for fighting and like constantly suspended and all this stuff. So I was this kid that was like deeply wanted to fit in and like would do anything he could to fit in, but also would like fight if I had to at the drop of the hat, which was like really often in Calgary. And actually I have to say, this is like something I appreciate about Calgary culture is like there was always just kind of like, if you got a problem, you fight. Like I
Right.
know that sounds terrible, but there was kind of a
I think it's a
simplicity.
hockey thing.
I think it was. There's kind of a simplicity about it. Like you just fight, and then at the end you shake hands, and that's the end of it. Uh, I'm not recommending that for anyone, but like when I grew up, as I got older, I always kind of carried that mentality: if you have a problem, you fight. And then like I entered into British Columbia, which is quite a bit different, and then I was like, oh my god, did I grow up around maniacs? Am I a maniac? Anyways, um, I skateboarding, as soon as I found skateboarding, I was like, this is it
Yeah.
for me, because it gave me a voice, because it came with like art and intact culture and a uniform and a way of dressing, and there was videos and music, and I was like, okay, so I've been completely told I am not part of this, but I can choose to be a part of this. I don't need a team to do this. I can totally do it on my own or with a group of people. It doesn't matter if you're good or if you're bad at it. You can express yourself however you want and how you dress, all of the stuff. And it just like clicked. And then the next level of that was like punk and hardcore, which I found as a
Yeah.
result of that. Like, Pusshead and like Puss Zone, we'd be like, oh, you check out all these bands. I'd be like finding all these bands. And when I found punk and hardcore, my parents, even today, like they'll say, it's like, well, it's good that you went to university. It's good that you did all these things, but they truly say it's like your greatest education was punk and hardcore and touring and seeing the world, because that's actually what set you up to be a human being in the world. Because my self confidence was so low about like when I entered into the workforce, like little teenager getting jobs and stuff. I just assumed I would go in and everyone was going to be terrible, so I would just be like, I don't know if aggressive is the right word, but like I'd be more like, I reject you before you have a chance to reject me.
Right.
And I had a total chip on my shoulder. And the more I played in punk and hardcore, the more I saw the world, I like calmed down quite a bit. And it helped me, like, especially trying to get things done with different groups of people in diverse
Yeah.
areas. Like, you gotta go to different countries and kind of like norming with different groups of people. It
Yeah.
really helped me like calm down, find my space. The biggest thing that I carried for the longest time was like this deep sense of needing to be liked by people and like fit in. Even in punk and hardcore, it was like a real difficulty for me. And
Same.
the thing that like I'd say like trained me out of it was going through like the biggest life difficulty, that 2016 period
Yeah.
where I was like, my life just was totally like destroyed. It was the thing that finally like broke me of that. But that was like my biggest Achilles heel, which is like initially what brought me into drugs and alcohol and addiction and all of that. But also it's what brought me into straight edge and like and all of those things. So like punk and hardcore was like this huge, huge gift to me. But also it was like one of those things where it's like I became over reliant on it, and it became like my shield against the world, instead of being like,
Totally.
well, I have to be in the world. I can't just live in this little thing. So it was, I'd say 80%. Well, no, actually, it was 100% a blessing in my life. But the way that I interacted with it made it a bit of a curse in my life for a
Yeah.
while, until I had the right experiences to train me out of that.
No, that makes total sense. It's funny that you say skateboarding, also because I managed a skateboard shop in high school. And like I was really involved in skateboarding also. Like I still am in some way. I don't skate, but like in some ways. And a lot of people I talk to in the hardcore community, like almost all of them are like skateboarding first and then hardcore. And I'm always like, that's so interesting. I do see that common theme that people felt like outsiders, but then within the community of hardcore and punk, they still wanted to be liked. And I think that that's also a universal thing. And so I think it's so cool that your parents were like, that's the greatest, education that you had, because I think that's a great lesson in learning about other people and how they interact, but also knowing that a lot of us have the same insecurities.
Two things I'll share with that. One time,
Okay.
one time someone said to me, in kind of like, well, not kind of like a totally mean way, it was like, and this is like in the hardcore world, it's like, what your problem is? You just want everyone to like you. And I was like, yeah, that is that is like 100. Like, why is that a mystery to you or to me? Like that is, haven't I just like written a bunch of songs about that? Like that is this thing that had fueled me. And it's this thing that like it really took me a long time to work on. And even at like, again, I'll be 50 soon. Even there's still moments where I'm like, oh, I just want you to like me. But like now I
Same.
understand. I understand what that thing is. But the other thing, it was something that I'd heard someone say about, someone said this to me about Raghunath in like a really negative way about him. Because like for anyone who's new to the show, I'm like a humongous Youth of Today fan. Like
The
most
best,
pivotal band, them in 7 Seconds, most pivotal bands in my life.
best, both of them.
Um, I was talking to someone who had a level of experience with Ray Capel. I won't go into it into the. I don't want to blow up the person's spot, but they're like, well, you know, the thing about that guy, all those songs that he wrote, he's not really like that. He just wishes he was like that. And I was like, well, yeah, isn't that like the point of writing a song? It's something you aspire to being. Like you see it in
Right.
yourself. Like if I think of like a Youth of Today song, like Honesty, which I love that song, Honesty.
It's a great
It's
song.
it's a great song. It's not like, Ragatha was like, well, you know what? I'm this immensely honest person and I'm going to talk about it. And I'm using myself as the landscape here. It's like, he's probably like, I'm a shithead and I lie to people about stuff and I don't want to be like that anymore. Wouldn't it be cool if I wasn't like that? And maybe we all could try to strive to be like that. So the idea of change and becoming like a better person, like when people talk about it from the space of perfectionism, and again, like I talk about this a lot in corporate culture, where people will be like, this is what our corporate culture is. And it's this like beautiful thing, but they feel like almost as if 10 people in a room writing that then makes that reality for everyone. When it's like, well, no, like that's awesome you did that, but it's something you aspire to. So again, going back to the Ray Capel story, when this person said that to me, I was like, well, yeah, of course. Like you think like every single Youth of Today song or Gorilla Biscuit song or Cro-Mag song or whatever band, you think they were writing like that because that's who they were? Or is it, do you think that it's who they're aspiring to be and they have kind of days where they're more like that and days where they're not like that? And like we kind of got into this back and forth. And then I was like, I'm a fucking grown adult and I'm arguing with this person about the motivations of Ray Capel when he was 20 years old. I don't want to be in this conversation
Right.
right now.
Well, I will say, because I know him well, and I mean, well enough. And I actually interviewed him yesterday for my podcast.
Awesome.
And,
Awesome.
and I asked him, and this is just important to know for people, because I said, if you could tell your 16, 17, 18-year-old self, like anything, as an adult, knowing what you know now, what would it be? And he was like stumped. And then he said something about, maybe I shouldn't have been such an asshole. And then he's like, but you know what? Being an asshole got me where I am right now. So I think it was important for me to have that moment. And I'm like, beautiful honesty, right? Like we all do things and it gets us to where we need to be. And it might not look perfect or right or good to someone else, but it doesn't mean that we're not trying to strive for something better, like you were saying.
Yeah, and again, like putting this, like we put it in both the therapeutic world, but also the coaching world. I talk to people a lot about like being aspirational about stuff, and I give them an idea of like a 70-30 split. And if you think of anything you want, let's say company culture or a way that you want to walk in the world, if you just say I am that, period, it's an untenable scenario because like we're human beings. And so if you're saying it for yourself, that's one thing. But if you're saying it for
Right.
you and 2 other people or 3 other people or 10 people or a whole organization, it's untenable. But if you
Right.
think of it from an aspirational space where I aspire to be this way, minimum 70% on average, and on the other 30%, I can quickly recognize that I'm not in that 70% and I have the insight, the skills and behaviors to be able to quickly as I can get back to that 70%. I'm not telling people to aim for 70% as an always number, but that you aspire to be that way 70% of the time and then you scale up. And
Yeah.
the way that I encourage people to think about it, both organizationally, but also individually, is like, you're always looking for a reduction in frequency, duration, and impact of behaviors that you don't like. So you want them to happen less often. You want them that when they inevitably happen, the duration of them is shorter. And then if the frequency goes down and the duration goes down, the impact should be less and less. At the same time, you want to look for an increase of frequency, duration, and impact for things that you do like. And so this is like really about like behavior identification, like, trigger points, all of that kind of stuff, both like at a systems level and individual level. And I do this stuff with myself, like frequency, duration, and impact around behavior change is an important way of looking at it, where you shoot for an average of 70-30 and then you scale up from there. I use it as the like perfection extinction model, where it's like you're never going to be perfect and most behaviors aren't going to go extinct. Like there's some give and play in there, and then start with 70-30 and scale up. And there's some things that I'm like way better at. So like, like I talked about being, I'm like the best partner that I've ever been in my life. There's all sorts of shithead, like immature, selfish behaviors that like I've like grown out of. And that doesn't mean I never do them, but it's like, instead of that being something that was kind of like the forefront of my behaviors, like as an example, hardcore ever always came first before any personal relationship I ever had. Where now it's like, I would never, ever put like something hardcore before my wife. Never, ever. But that was something I had to like scale up towards. And I know that sounds crazy,
Right.
but like I had to
No,
work
it
on it.
doesn't sound crazy. No, I mean, I'll be honest, like I think the demise of my first marriage had a lot to do with like some selfish behavior that I had, and just like wanting to hang out and be around, hardcore people, because he was like normie. He was like such like a normal dude. Like he was like a frat guy, right? And like my family loved him and he was awesome. He's a great dad and we have a great co-parenting relationship. But I was probably pretty selfish because I was like, I'm wanting to like, I remember going to see like Sick of It All with one of my male friends. Like, is that what you do when you're married? I don't really know if that's what you do when you're married, but I was doing it all the time, right? So
Like it's so funny. Anyways, I don't want to get too far off track, but the idea of perfectionism, and really this came from this Ray Capel conversation, but something that I did want to touch base with you on around punk and hardcore. Something that appealed to me a lot was it kind of put forth this like moral framework.
yeah,
And of course, depending on what kind of style of hardcore you're involved in, it's going to vary. But the
right.
most basic one is that we are a community and we look out for each other. And you should trust the person to your left and the person to your right. And I think at a very, very simplistic level, that can be true. But we are also
For
talking
sure.
about people who grew up in possibly their families of origin lived with addiction or mental health concerns or abuse. There's young people finding themselves. There's all of this stuff. And I think the idea of kind of people, the promise that punk and hardcore has, that we all look out for each other, we all have each other's back, is pretty wavery when we get into the complexity of human beings growing up, and there's power dynamics and
Yeah.
all that. So I was interested in your thoughts on that.
Yeah, no, it's totally true, and I think it's an interesting thing because before we started recording, I was telling you that it was just like me and my one friend who are still like these straight edge 52-year-olds, right? Like we're still out here calling ourselves straight edge kids. So weird, but I do think it really depended on like the sect of the music that you were into, and I think I really identify and I'm able to really like, I know that people would look out for me in like the straight edge hardcore community. Now, like Detroit's it was like a huge beat down, as you know, a huge beat down, like, which like people would fight a lot. And there was like there was stuff with Nazis and like lots of that, not the same kind of safety. Right. And I think, there is definitely areas, who your friends are. And I think that's just like that in the world, right? Right in the world. And within the communities, I think you could always find it. I do think, again, growing up in the 80s, it's different for being female. I think people looked out for me more than males, right? I'm just going to be very honest. Like, I do think that was a truth. And especially in Detroit, like, because, the punk kids who lived on the streets knew me. And then, like the straight edge kids knew me and I was kind of cool with everybody. I think I had more of that capacity where I had, people looking out for me all the time and having community and really feeling a part of a community. I don't know if that's true for everybody though.
I love what you just said there, and I think what it's true. It's your experience, and it's true. I'm going to give you a different angle that I think about a lot, and I really consider a lot. Is someone could be vegan and still be a total bastard. Someone could be straight edge and still be a total piece of shit. Like
Yes.
Someone could be part of punk and hardcore and listen to the exact same bands that you like and have a lot of the same similar life experiences, and that doesn't mean that they're not going to take advantage of you and do something shitty. And
Totally.
also how we can have friends and people in our lives that we love and respect and unintentionally dismiss some of their negative behaviors because we're all part of this thing, and one of the
Totally.
things that I really encourage anyone that's part of any subculture that has like any kind of like moral component is like, people are complex and life is complex, and some of the moral or community foundations that I think punk and hardcore proposes to have are totally legit, and I think some of them are difficult to just fully trust. And I think that people like really gotta like always really like hold up a mirror for themselves and their behaviors, and like really hold up a mirror, and also challenge their friends and pay attention to what's going on around them, because like life is complex and human beings are complex.
Yeah, I love that. You're totally right.
All right, so listen, we're heading towards the close of the interview, and this has been like super cool, but I just want to hear about your practice and how people engage with you. Like, I just want to hear about your day-to-day, like what you do, how you do it, and then how people can find you and engage with you, because I am sure that people are going to be very interested in connecting with you after this.
So I am a workaholic. So just so everyone knows that I don't have a very good work-life balance. And also I think is because my husband lives out of state. I try to balance it more when we're together, but when we're not together, I work 60 hours a week sometimes. So like I started working at 9 a.m. I'm not done till 9 tonight. So as soon as we get off, I have a 5 o'clock client. My practice is I do a lot of one-on-ones. I love group and I don't get to do enough groups. So I'm hoping actually to do coaching groups where I'm, having a topic and people are interested in really getting involved in that. My Monday, Tuesday, Wednesdays, I'm usually working 12 to 14 hours. I have my daughter Wednesday nights. She dances, so she's 17. She'll be 17. She dances. So when I'm done, she's done dancing. And then Thursday and Friday are lighter days for me because I have her and she's around more. And then Saturdays are lighter, but Sunday through Wednesday are pretty wild days for me. And I also do my podcast in between. So, I have a wild schedule. Like people think it's hilarious. Like I wake up at 4:30 in the morning. I chant in the morning. I, walk a few miles. I work out in the gym. I'm very regimented. I go to sleep at approximately the same time. Like I have to be regimented. Otherwise I like literally will do nothing and just doom scroll on social media. So to get a hold of me, honestly, the best ways to get a hold of me are Instagram, honestly, which I feel funny because we just talked about not using social media, but I'm on Instagram. It's the Hardcore Therapist. You can email me at thehardcoretherapist@gmail.com, or my website is thehardcoretherapist.com. And I do want to say I do sell merch, and all my merch proceeds go to underinsured and uninsured people for mental health help.
Heck yeah.
So that's how people get a hold of me.
We're about to go into what we call the crucial 3, which is going to be 3 questions that are scale in difficulty. But before we get to that, what can you tell us about your podcast?
So my podcast, the Hardcore Therapist Podcast, I know I'm very on brand all the time. So on Wednesdays, I put it out. I have people in the community ask me a question, and I spend anywhere from 10 to 20 minutes answering that question. So like this week was about, what do I do if my partner doesn't want to get help? And I spend the whole time just talking about that subject. And then on Fridays, I interview people from the hardcore community and punk community, and we talk about like why hardcore for them, and then talk about their stories. So you can find me on all platforms. I'm there.
And we'll make sure to put all the links to that in the episode. Is there anything that you want? So before we get to the crucial 3, anything you want to put in, any shout outs, any questions you want to ask, anything that you want to raise?
No, I'm afraid about these 3 questions. I'm not gonna lie.
They're gonna get hard. They're gonna get hard.
I'm like stressing out just thinking about them. Don't want to get them wrong. Okay.
You ready to go?
Yeah.
Since you rebranded to the Hardcore Therapist and you've kind of like And I love when you said like I'm on brand. I love that. I think that's sick. I love that you have merch. I love that how you use the merch. Uh, I am a I have a saying. You have to 100% believe your own shit and be completely willing to be told you're full of shit at the same time. And
Totally.
then like if you believe your own shit, you should be able to like respond. But also if you believe your own shit, if someone points something out, you're like, hell yeah, great. Thank you. You're right. I'm going to be able to adjust to that. So being on brand to me is like, that's killer. I love that. But since you've done this, you've made this pivot, you're all in, you've got this brand. What is one thing that you've learned about yourself as a hardcore therapist that you recognize you need to still keep working on?
I need to keep working on people liking me, or like I get really worried if people don't listen to episodes, and I get really concerned about people not like going to a festival and people not buying my merch and not being that interested in what I have to do. And I have to realize that it's not necessarily me. It could be whatever they're going through. And sometimes I have a hard time doing that. That would probably be the thing I still need to work on the most.
Question number 2, what's one thing that you have identified yourself that you need to work on that you have essentially, I don't want to say made it extinct, but you've gotten into a place where you can leave it alone? And how did you get there?
That is a super hard question. Um, I think for me, I don't know, I was going to say body image. That is totally not true. I totally freak out about my body all the time. So I can talk more neutral about my body, but that would not be it. Um, hmm, if my parents are listening, I'm sorry. Being so worried about my parents and their thoughts about like what I'm doing, if I'm doing the right thing or the wrong thing. Um, I grew up in my family is like this Jewish family who's like, if I'm not doing it their way, it's a real issue. And I still struggled with that up until honestly my marriage. And my husband has really helped me with that.
Heck yeah. All right, third question. This one's a doozy.
Okay. That last one was a doozy.
it can be from anywhere in the world, but it is completely centered in punk and hardcore. What are the 3, from your perspective, so it doesn't have to be anyone else's perspective, what are the 3 best records to inspire change in someone's life?
It's so hard. Break Down the Walls would be my number one. This is really hard, like, because I'm just like racking my brain now. Why is this so hard to answer?
This is like I think about this.
I'm sweating right now trying to answer this question. I mean, I could have gone like bands. I could have been like, yes, these bands. I do think for me, again, pretty much Shelter's entire catalog, to be honest. I can't pick one. And Burns self-titled 7-inch that came out in that would be it. That would be my 3 there.
Ooh, that's so good. That Burns 7-inch is like outrageous.
Oh my God. I could listen to that every day of my life.
Mm-hmm. And like
it's so good.
There's so much. We could do a whole podcast on that one record. All right, listen, this was an awesome conversation. You totally rock. Anything that you wanted to say as we're closing off?
No, I just hope that people feel comfortable getting the mental health help that they need, and know that everyone needs to reach out for help, and it's not a weakness, it's a strength. That would be it.
Heck yeah. Awesome.
Super hardcore review.
This is great.
I'm saying
everyone listening, like, I know I kind of joked earlier about the idea of like how I there's people from all sorts of backgrounds that are on the show, but very often I have people with punk and hardcore. Those are the ones I kind of have, I don't want to say the most fun with, but they're there's always kind of like the subtext of hardcore in there. And the thing I want to say is like, listen, you don't have to come from any kind of like subculture to create change, or to figure things out. But I will say that figuring stuff out really does require people to pivot, to be able to take a leap, to take a hard look in the mirror, to take risks and do all those things. And so much of what we talked about today with Sarah. And if those are things that you struggle with and you do want to create some change, you want to figure some things out, life won't wait. Like you really have to get into the mix. And that doesn't mean you have to solve it the very next day. So if something happens on a Wednesday, it doesn't needs to be fixed by a Thursday, but it does require that you take a step forward. Sometimes you can do it on your own. Sometimes you do it with the help of books and videos and the community people in your community. And other times you do it with professionals that you reach out to and help. Sarah's a great example of someone that you can reach out to. And the biggest thing is you don't need to be alone. So if you are struggling, if you want to see change immediately or in the future, and you do think you need help, then there is no better time than now to reach out and do that. So with that, everyone, I hope you enjoyed this one as much as I did. My name is Aram and Sarah, and this is One Step Beyond.
One step. One